Okay, so now that we've gone through the ideas behind looking at what what can the risks be and what's going to be our approach to finding out what they're all going to, where they all are, what's going to make them happen, all those sort of basic consultative mechanisms that we've talked about, getting your staff on board, getting your senior managers on board, starting to think about how we approach risk management as an organisation, and starting to think about what can and possibly might go wrong. We've looked at our information sources to make sure that we've got good visibility, and we've made sure we're starting to already set up a culture within our organisation that makes sure that that we actually treat it seriously and don't just pay it off as one of those things. Okay, so it is something we need to think about all the time in business, and just about any other activity we do. So now we need to go through the analysis stage, okay? So we've often gone out and had a good look at what can go wrong. So now we need to start to really think it through and think about, well, how bad is it and what does it mean? So the first thing we look at is likelihood. Okay, so when we're talking about likelihood, we're saying, what's the chances or estimating the likelihood of the event occurring, okay? It's the first part of our risk analysis, okay? So in other words, what are the chances? What's the probability, the likelihood, for the event, okay? So what we need to do is at this point, managers and the staff they're dealing with need to provide a basis for risk evaluation, okay? Think about risk acceptance and then risk treatment, right? And what we're looking at here is we're looking at what's the frequency, what's the probability, and what's the proximity. So there's a bunch of things there that we need to start to think about, but the first one is, well, what's the chance that thing's going to happen? All right, so we need to know, is it going to happen? The next one that we think about is frequency. So if this is will it happen, this is how often it will happen. So this measures the rate of occurrence, okay? So how often is it likely to happen over a given period of time? In some cases, we're sort of looking at frequency being important for, it might be the sort of event that happens on an ongoing basis. And if it's continually happening, the sum total of all those occurrences will actually end up to quite a bad result. Okay, there might be small things individually, but we need to start to think about it, because it can have quite a high impact. On the other hand, it might be an everyday occurrence, so we need to start to deal with that. Things like shoplifting from stores, shops, people steal things all the time. Okay, so we need to think about how often it occurs. If it turns out that it's so infrequent as to almost be unlikely ever, how much time and effort are you really going to put into it? Are you going to get, there's always a chance for a flood in the middle of a desert, but how often does it happen? Once every billion years. So we might not be looking at that. On the other hand, you might have something as a daily occurrence, and we need to think about that as a sort of, as a bigger picture. All right, so the first one, as I say, is likelihood. What's the chance it's going to happen? And the frequency, how often is it likely to happen? Okay, we start to also talk into, the probability. That's another way to look at it. And what we're talking about in probability is the likelihood of the effect or the outcome. So, when's it going to happen? What's going to cause it? You might put it in a scale. So, 1 in 10 chance. This is, you're trying to give it some sort of measurement. Is it a 1 in 10, or is it 1 day, a week, or we need to quantify. Okay, so when we're talking about likelihoods and those sort of things, we need to know what the probabilities are. Okay, so we're now trying to get to some numbers. Likelihood, not very likely. Well, your opinion are not very likely, and my opinion are not very likely, might differ. So what we need to do is actually come up with some sort of probability and say, well, what is the number? All right, and when we talk about proximity, okay, what we're starting to talk about there is that we know that things are more likely to occur at certain seasons. So we know, if we're looking at likelihood frequency and we're taking through probability and proximity, we know that in Australia at December, there's probably going to be a bushfire somewhere. Okay, there's probably not going to be one through the rest of the year, but we know come the summer periods in Australia, it gets very hot and there's a high danger of bushfire. So we know that, and every year you can pretty much set your calendar around it. And we know that in January and February, there's pretty much going to be a flood somewhere. Okay, so, we know that there's fires, we know there's floods, and we know when they occur. All right, so that starts to give us a bit of a seasonal thing. But the thing is, outside those seasons, it's probably far less likely. We're probably not going to see it. So that's really just talking about proximity. All right, so when we're talking about likelihood, There's a couple of different factors there. We start to look at, the standard lines are that it is very likely, it's likely, okay, so very likely means it's almost certainly going to happen. It's likely, which means it's probably going to happen. It's possible, so it could happen. It's unlikely, or it's rare. Okay, so when we're talking about rare, next to no chance of it ever happening. Unlikely, yeah, it could happen, but it probably won't. So if we're talking about rare, there's maybe a 5% chance, okay? I really don't think it's going to happen. It could happen, but I really don't think it will. Unlikely, we're starting to look at about the 6 to 20% chance, saying, hey, look, I don't think it's going to happen, but there's a chance. Okay, when we get to possible, it might occur occasionally. So now we're looking at 20 to 40% chance. Am I missing the bus? Okay, there's a chance that you're going to miss the bus this morning. Likely means it's probably going to occur, somewhere between 40 and 80%, and very likely means it's going to happen. You're pretty certain that it's going to happen during the event or during the activity. Okay. What we also have is then we need to think about, well, if it's very likely, possible, unlikely, or rare, okay, taking those out for a minute. If we start to think about this, we go, well, okay, if it does happen, if our event does happen, what's the impact or consequence? Okay, so we need to start to think in terms of impact or consequence. So, I know there is a chance that, it might be raining tomorrow. It's 40% likely that it's going to rain, so, we'll put it in the possible category. Okay, well, what's that going to mean to me? Okay, and when we're starting to think about that, we start to think in similar terms. We start to go, oh, that would be disastrous, okay? Or it would be severe, okay? Or it would be moderate, or it would be minimal. Okay, so that's what we're starting to look at there. So disastrous, severe, moderate, or minimal impact. Okay, so when we're starting to think about those, disastrous is pretty much what it sounds. Is it going to stop my business, destroy my business, wreck my business, possible loss of life, all those sort of things? When I start to get down to serious, we're starting to talk about things like, a lot of reputation damage, maybe significant financial losses, could be someone getting injured, those sort of things. Moderate, once again, not so bad. They're not usually a showstopper. If I'm thinking about as a physical risk to a person, the sort of thing that might get them to, you might have to go down to, the doctor's surgery or get first aid, those sort of things. It might be a small disruption to the business, whatever it happens to be. And then minimal is really, the consequence isn't really great. It's a minor loss, on a physical level, maybe someone gets a Band-Aid. Okay, so we need to start going from somewhere between dead and Band-Aid, somewhere between total loss of business to slight business disruption. Okay, and that's what we're starting to look at from there. So there's not a whole lot of detail to it, and we'll go into those shortly and start to break them out. Okay, so moving on and starting to think about what we've just been analysing. Obviously, we looked at likelihood and consequence. The way that's normally represented when, it's commonly done pretty much on a chart, where we think about looking at what's the likelihood of an event happening, okay, down to, never going to happen through to almost certain. And then what we normally look at is we look at consequence and we go, the lowest consequence at this end, and then obviously the worst at this end. So, that's bad up here, all right? And then what you're doing is when you're starting to think about it, you break out your graph or your matrix. And then when you're starting to plot your risks down here, obviously is the ones that, it's not really a problem. It's not really going to happen very often. And we don't really care. Through to up here, which is almost certain and pretty much catastrophic, gives us the highest causes for concern. So that's the way it is. We've got a few examples there that you'll find in, in your learning material, so you can have a look at a bit of a graph or an example. But what you're really trying to do is you're trying to get these down to a visual representation at a later point. So you can say, look, here are my main concerns and really my priorities. I need to deal with these things first. And then you make your way through your list down to the things that, well, look, it's going to happen. It's going to happen rarely. I'm not really that fussed. Okay, so what this does is by giving a likelihood and a consequence to things, we start to think about how we want to categorize them and in what order we want to deal with them. Okay, we start to be able to treat them and deal with them. And it just means that if we've got a table like that, we don't spend our time trying to fix little things that aren't a problem and keep our eyes firmly concentrated on fixing the big issues for the company. All right, Now, when we start talking about consequence and likelihood, what would have stood out to you fairly quickly is that this is a bit subjective. Like, I mean, how do we know how often that happens? How do we know what the percentage chances are? A lot of this is about opinion, becomes part of the hard thing. And if you ask 3 different people to rate it, what you might get is 3 very different answers. Okay, so what you need to do is use your principles, use your best judgment, and that's why a good consultation process is very important, so you can take a broad amount of views, okay, and then you've got the best possible information to go on. So as you can see, leaving it just to one person is going to give you a lot of their personal biases and influences that come into that, and that's pretty important to know, okay, because we need to get a clear set of priorities, okay, and we need to evaluate also what is our tolerance for risk. What are we saying is totally unacceptable to our organisation, and what are we saying is something that we can live with. In other words, where are we going to draw the line? Are we going to sort of draw it here and say, look, anything fatal we need to deal with, anything less than that we'll just deal with as we go? Or are we saying, actually, no, we want to draw the line here. Anything above that we need to try and discount or eliminate as hard as possible, and sort of try and minimise everything. So depending on your industry, depending on your risk tolerance, those sort of things, that's going to come up. But what we really need to do is to sit down with the key decision makers in the organisation and really work out what are the priorities, okay? So in what order are we going to treat it? Are we going to start here and work our way back, which obviously we would do, but how far down the list are we going to go? If we've got something sitting here and something sitting here, which one is most important to us? All those sort of things start to come into it, and we need to really start thinking through, well, how do we want to deal with things? What order are we going to deal with them? At what point are we going to cut away? All right, so that really comes down to the prioritising of the risk treatment. All right, come up with a plan, work out what you want to deal with, make sure you're negotiating with other people, or at least getting a wide range of inputs. Start looking at a whole range of different treatments, because what we want to do then is come up with a bit of a schedule. So where the problems start with this really is that there's a lot of factors that really start to influence the analysis of risk. Obviously, you don't want to find that when you're doing your risk, your risk review, that you've actually got real problems in your company. A lot of people like to, put it under the carpet and hide problems, those sort of things. So what we really want to do is we want to start to think about, where are the influences going to come? And the first thing that, really companies start to worry about, or what can shape a lot of the thinking when doing your risk analysis, is control issues. Okay, that, sometimes people don't want to have, or they think it's outside their control, or they think someone else is going to control it. They don't want to, give over their power to some other organisation. So control can be a factor there. The next thing is dread. Sometimes people are happy in denial. It's a lot easier just to go, well, if we don't look at it, there's nothing wrong. So there's a certain level of fear that if we start to dig through our company, what might we find? What might be wrong? And if something's wrong, am I going to get in trouble? All right, so that am I going to get in trouble is a major deterrent to people actively engaging in risk management, which is a bit of a shame because you need to get it done, okay? But like going to the doctor, no one really likes doing it. They think there's going to be bad news. And if there's bad news, it's going to be horrible. So what they do is they hide at home rather than go get the help they need. Familiarity is going to be a bit of a thing in here. If people are, if they're not really familiar with the business, you might be new to the organisation, you might not necessarily know what the process are for risk management. So familiarity with both the process of understanding risk and familiarity with the organisation they're going to go into, if they're not that familiar with it, they're not going to know some of the tricks of the trade. Once again, another reason to make sure you've got heaps of people to come in, as many people in your organisation as you can, to start to give you those opinions and share the information with you. All right, that broad range of opinions, it just comes up all over the time, time and time again. Get on it, get those opinions in, get the feedback in. Timing becomes an issue to make sure that you've allowed enough time in the organisation, that you don't have any other key events going on at the time. Obviously, if there's a lot of distractions going on, that can be a bit of a problem. So you wouldn't want to start doing your risk management program in the middle of your Christmas stock take sale or whatever it happened to be, or your peak season. It's the sort of thing that you want to make sure that you allow time to do, because it is going to be time intensive, but also looking at your calendar and seeing what big events do you have coming up, because you don't really want to be doing this process in the middle of a major event. You want to make sure you're doing things ahead of time, allow yourself time to do it and get it done. And obviously social influences can really affect your risk management as well. If other businesses similar to yours have been in the media for all sorts of different problems, a lot of the time people get concerned and then they're going to start sending you emails, or they might be concerned about risk, and we've seen that with banks. If a bank has a problem, all the other banks, obviously all their customers start to worry as well. Is that going to happen to my money? Is it going to happen to my company? Whatever it happens to be. The other thing is that, you need your managers involved the whole time as well, reviewing the process and reviewing the analysis during that evaluation process. So making sure that you have those key personnel free and that you are able to get their attention is really critical. All right, so while we're going through, while we're undertaking the review, any sort of insignificant or minor risks, those are ones that we might be able to fix straight away. So you might actually find that while you're doing this, you've drawn your magic line through here, but while you're doing your review, you might find a few down here and they might be very simple to get rid of. So what you might be able to do is, without having to go through the whole process first, if it's a 5-minute job, you might knock those out straight away and just take them away. You don't have to consider them anymore. So just little fixes around the place, okay? It's a good time to sit down and go, look, there's some big things we need to do. There's a bunch of things we're not really going to worry about, but we could also do a couple of 5-minute fixes and fix our policy and procedure to sort of, shore up some of this minor detail. So, we can do that. But similarly, if we have got to the sort of Chicken Little, where people are saying the sky is falling and they've taken some issue that should actually be here and somehow it's ended up in here, during the review process, by having the managers come in and deal with the staff and make sure that you've got that viewpoint being looked at again, you might find that some of these start to slide down a little bit, because sometimes people can get very carried away and overstate the importance of things. Okay, so this is a good time to find out where things really are. So make sure you've got that quiet time, make sure you've got those people available, make sure you're not doing it at, when there's a million other things going on. Think about the people involved, deal with any sort of concerns or fears, particularly about people saying, well, look, if something bad's happened, I might lose my job, or those sort of things. Make sure that you're starting to really, consult with people and get those things out there. Because when people start to hide things, if they think they're getting in trouble, they'll just hide it and hide it and hide it. And one day it'll come out. And when one thing comes out, the whole lot will come out. And that'll be a massive thing to fix. And it's just not tidy. I've seen that happen. And it's not good. And it just means that you then spend years fixing stuff up. All right, make sure that you've got clear documentation. That's another consideration. As you're going through, make sure you're collecting information in a consistent fashion. If you are going to make any alterations or changes, make sure that you keep the original somewhere so you can find out what changed. Because every now and then, if things get dealt with by many, many different hands, people are all making little alterations and adjustments, and sometimes someone might miss something key, and you want to be able to go back and compare to the original while you're tidying up documents and say, well, did we capture all the data? So keep originals around. We do need to be able to trace what's going on. And while you're doing it, make sure that, that you're not sort of taking your eye off the ball. The idea is if you can get the information into a consistent fashion, you want to keep collecting it then throughout the year or throughout your period. All right, so this isn't a one-off process. You need good systems in place. Okay, once your evaluation's completed, you can actually start to come up with some risk treatment strategies. For example, if we've identified an issue here and we want to fix it, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start looking at, well, how are we going to fix it? What are we going to do about it? Who's going to be involved in that? And that's what we're going to do next. But just to recap then, all key staff that you can get, make sure you allow time for them to be available. Make sure you're considering, how you're consulting with people. Think about what might be influencing behaviours of those people as well. Things like, as I say, fear or concern or dread, or, do they have the right knowledge? Do you have enough people with enough visibility and understanding of the business? Think about, do you guys have the skill sets required to really undertake risk management? Okay, a few different considerations there. And then think about how you're going to track it. Think about, as you're going through collecting the data, keep observing what's coming through. So any of these little fixes you might be able to take out straight away. Anything major, okay, we need to know about it and categorize it correctly so that we're not overstating the thing, but we're also taking it seriously enough and not understating it all of a sudden. We're not shifting things down. And that should be, that should now have you in a position of analysing the risks that you've identified and starting to come up with, some sort of priority for treatment. All right. And if you've got that, that's your analysis stage done. We'll move on to the next one in a second.